Welcome back to another video. Are you ready to see how I turn this into this? Most of my tables, whether it's a dining table or a sofa table, usually begins with the top. So let's go over to the miter station, make a fresh cut, slide it against my makeshift stop block, and cut 5 boards to length. This will make up the top, but before we get busy on that, we also got to work out where it's warped and twisted. So we're going to take it over to the joiner, joint one face and one side. Let's continue to breeze through the milling process, go into the planer now to plane the opposite side for the right thickness, and then over to the table saw just to rip them all down to size. Let's glue the top up, apply glue to the edge of each plank, and clamp them down. Raise your hand if you love these little C-clamps. That's right, I know I do. They keep the boards nice and flat, and that way sanding is much easier later. Apply clamps on the top and bottom for equal pressure. It's so hot in this shop, I literally can't think. Let's just lay down.
It's so damn hot.
Okay, time to get up. Let's start cutting the wood for the table base. We're using fir lumber, and we're going to go to the table saw for my handy dandy miter gauge. It makes quick work of repeatable cuts. Let's lay these boards out. Our table base is going to pretty much go something like this. And if you haven't noticed, I'm not pre-sanding any boards because I want to keep the texture and the rough character of the boards because it's going to help us achieve the finish that we're going for later. But going over to my foreman, I'm going to make some quick pocket holes, apply some glue, and let's get to putting these bases together. I'm going to use one of my parallel clamps just to keep the boards in place after I checked it with my square. I don't want anything to move around, and when you're using pocket holes, sometimes the boards have a tendency to shift slightly, so we're going to use those clamps to make sure that doesn't happen. We're going to repeat the process for the top, glue it, pocket hole it, clamp it, and screw it down. I'm working on my engagement and audience retention on my videos, so I'm breezing through this process, but at any point, if you're interested in the tools or the products used in this video, I'll have a link in the description, as well as a complete set of DIY plans for this build. For this next part, we're just going to place some 2x2 lumber underneath. We're not going to use any fancy angle finders. We're just going to scribe a line, take it to the miter saw, and cut it the old-fashioned way. If you haven't done so already, please hit that subscribe button. I'd really appreciate it, and I love the support. Let's put this support cross member in. It should fit perfect. It's nice and snug. Yes, that's exactly how I want it. Now let's repeat the process for the other side. Simply scribe the lines, take it to the miter saw, and cut it. Then we're just going to apply glue and attach it with an 18 gauge brad nail. It should look something like this. Off camera, I ripped a few more 2x2 lumber supports, and we're just going to pocket hole it, apply glue, and attach those just like the other pieces, using the clamp to make sure it stays in place, and then zip it in with some screws. The unique thing about this multi-stop T-square is I can use it to scribe lines. This table got a little out of square, about 1 degree, so I was able to scribe it perfectly. And then I've got this new track saw. This is the first time I've used it, by the way, and it made easy work of finding my line and cutting it, especially since the line wasn't square. It was 1 degree off. But then just taking it over, we're going to place it down, hammer it into place, and then zip some screws underneath to hold it in place. I'm digging how this table is looking so far, so moving on to the middle shelf, I skipped the process of showing you the lamination of gluing up these planks. I figured we've already showed 1 glue up, why do 2? But the middle shelf is going to look something like this. I pre-drilled all my pocket holes. I'm going to apply glue, clamp these boards down, and attach them together using pocket hole screws. You can see here where I drilled the recessed 3/8 hole so I could attach the top to that frame. Now I'm putting in these support blocks. These blocks just keep the shelf level, and it makes it easier so I don't have to do any fancy clamping or leveling. This will keep it all nice and square according to the table itself. Although it doesn't show it on camera at this point, I am dying from the heat. I'm crazy thirsty, and it's about to be time for a water break. Working in a non-climate controlled shop is extremely hot, so just douse your head off with some water and let's move on. Let's go to the top. Remember how we set it to the side? Well, it's time to get it and take it over to the planer. Now the top needs to be cut to size. So I'm just gonna use my track saw again. It made easy work of that. And then moving on to my handy dandy router and put a nice little round over on it. We're about to begin the finish work on this table, but before we do, let's go ahead and attach the top. We're gonna flip the base over onto the top, use a marking tool to line it up appropriately, and then we're gonna attach it using Z-clips. Z-clips are awesome because they allow for seasonal wood movement, and if you haven't used them before, I'll have a link below so you can check them out. Moving on to the finish work, but before we do that, I gotta get this off the workbench. It was a little heavier than I thought, but what the hey, I decided to go ahead and muscle it over to the blanket. If you haven't noticed, I haven't sanded any of this lumber so far. I'm trying to keep it nice and exposed and rough for this finish work.
Okay guys, for this finish work, we're gonna be adding 3 parts weathered oak, 1 part classic gray. I want pretty much a natural finish with a hint of gray just kind of stuck everywhere the grain is exposed. You'll see what I mean here in a minute. Let's get busy on it.
This finish is very rustic and it'll have a natural yet gray undertone, and we want to show all the character, the knots, the divots, the chip outs, all that's part of the charm. So we're not going to sand it until after we apply this finish, and this goes without saying. Just wipe the stain on. There's no wrong way to do it. Just get busy. Now that the 2-part stain is done, we need to let it dry. I'm going to let it dry for approximately 4 hours before moving on to the next step. For the final step, we're going to apply 2 coats of furniture paste from walrus oil. Let it sit for 20 minutes and then buff off with a clean rag.
We just finished wiping the piece down and buffing it with a clean cloth. The piece now will harden to a very nice finish and it'll feel really nice to the touch. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Please don't forget to subscribe, and I'll see you next time.